Okay, so this is my review of Lovecraft Country Episode 3, Holy Ghost. Like Episode 2, it's directed by Daniel Sackheim and written by the showrunner-creator Misha Green. Okay, so the opening title card here really plays as an endpoint for the episode, being where we're eventually going to get to. It feels like it is just a racist headline in the newspaper because it says, in summer of 1955, a group of black men and women moved into a house in the north side of Chicago. Then 10 days later, 3 people went missing, never to be seen again inside of the house, and that pioneering is dangerous. So it's talking about the 3 white men that die at the end of the episode and are put in the basement. And the pioneering is dangerous is the racist part of it too, where they're telling the community of whites that trying these new things and ideas and having these black people live in the neighborhood is a dangerous move. So we see how the episode now unfolds those 10 days leading up to those 3 men dying. And that becomes the transition cards we see with day 1. So we see Leti is now bringing her sister Ruby to this house she has bought. It looks like the house from the movie It. It's spooky right off the bat, and Leti says the important line to Ruby, this can be our chance to really bond as sisters. But to clear any confusion with this part of the story and Leti getting money, Leti is telling people that she won money through the lotto and will slip up later in the episode and tell Ruby that she actually got it from her mother's inheritance, only directed to her, which Leti truly believes because, as we learn later, that she was put under a spell by Christina again. And the money's actually from Christina. So maybe it was a little jarring this beginning because coming from where we just lost George last episode and they were on the road, all of a sudden we're kind of settled in with everybody already. So I do think there's a little bit of issue of how they're deciding to map out these storylines. And I think what I was a little disappointed in this episode is that this one really felt like a side quest, littering a little bit of things into the main story arc. I'll delve more into that as the review goes on. So we're going to see grief throughout this episode revolving around George's death. That starts with George's wife Hippolyta. We see she's doing this behavior of ripping out the pages of George's favorite book, Dracula. And later on in the episode, Montrose will drop that book because she got a new one, saying it was just because there was coffee spilt on it. But she's destroying the book and then rebuying it. So it's some odd behavior in her grief. And they set up well in this episode her not trusting Tick and Montrose and that her gut's telling her that they're hiding something from her about George's death. And they quickly show her notice the dishes are the same way George did them that Tick is doing them. And they also quickly show that Dee here pauses and has this emotional grief moment where you feel really bad for her, but it's really quick. You got to catch it, where she just looks down at the table and realizes she's not setting a plate for George. So they do a good job of sprinkling in everyone facing little emotional beats of grief. And that even goes to when Tick goes to his dad's place. Right on top of the vinyl player is a Count of Monte Cristo book, still connecting to George. That Montrose isn't taking it well either. And we see with Montrose that he's passed out drunk. He's difficult to Tick. And we see they fight now, Tick and Montrose, about what they should tell certain people and how they came up with this lie and if they should keep going. And Montrose really fights back on this idea of telling Hippolyta anything. And you see Tick says if Uncle George was here, he would want to do, and then gets cut off by Montrose saying, well, he's not here. But when he slams that table, then the train tracks just go by. So one of the first hints we get that maybe George, in a supernatural way, is watching them and is around. So important little details happen also in day 2, because this is when we see Tick goes to see Leti at the house she bought, and we see they're moving in on a Sunday because that's when most of the neighborhood is going to church and no one will stop them. But unfortunately, there are people who show up and they cruelly put bricks on the horns and let them hang there to drive them mad and get them out of the house and not be in their neighborhood. The little detail you could also miss here is the cop drives by here and just smirks and doesn't care about them doing that to the black people. It's really messed up. But again, a lot of stuff in this episode flies by really quick that you might not catch on first watch. So then we jump to day 5. And that car horn's still going with the brick on it. And to top things off, they mess with the boiler here. But at the same time, we actually get introduced to our first ghost here that looks like something from The Walking Dead. Looked really cool and pretty terrifying. I love when Tick shows up here to look through the basement with Leti. He's got a baseball bat. You'll see a lot of the baseball bat in this episode. Again, giving that throw to the Jackie Robinson they keep hinting at in Tick's dreams. And he has an important line here, Tick, where he's like, oh, you know, the neighbor's just using excessive heat and noise to drive you out. It's the same tactics we used in Korea. And she's like, for what? And then he freezes up and doesn't answer. So that, again, keeps us reminded about there's some really messed up stuff Tick was a part of in Korea that haunts him. And the boiler here, it's all messed up, so the temperature is really hot in this place. And the sexual tension rises now between Leti and Tick, but she goes to grab his hand and he kind of resists a bit. I'm guessing in his mind, he knows he's leaving soon, so he doesn't want to get too attached. Now we transition to day 8, where Leti has the party. Of course, the whole white neighborhood's watching them have this party. But this leads to one of my favorite scenes in the episode, where we actually see Dee playing with her friend's Ouija board. The sequence was shot really well. It was edited really well, cutting really quickly between a bunch of insert shots, getting the audience to understand what we're seeing on the Ouija board, what they're reading. And it worked really well having the music play light in the beginning, but then once there is a spirit in the room from the game, the lights flicker and they slow down the music. Made it really creepy. And we see when the kid asks who are we talking to, it says George is dead. This sets Dee off thinking that her friends are messing with her. Then we also see Hippolyta upstairs. She goes into this room and she's attracted to this shiny instrument we can assume was used by the scientist who lived here. And that sets up something interesting for the future storyline with her, because when we see the 3 white guys who eventually die that come in the house, when they go in that same room, it's not there anymore. So did she take it? What is she going to do with that instrument? There's some importance there. So we see Tick now shows up at the party and gets crazy jealous seeing Leti dance with another guy. They shot this really well from Tick's point of view. I think as a man, we've all been there where you're looking over and when you're jealous. They showed it exactly how you feel, where it's going in slow-mo and you're zoomed in on the touching that's happening that you're not liking. Really effectively showing jealous rage. And I love that they have Leti notice he's seeing this and then smirks and continues to do it to really hook, line, and sinker him, because she was pissed she kind of got rejected by him with the hand holding before and knew that would kind of get a rise out of him. And what does he do? He goes upstairs to bang her, marking his territory. And it's cool they open that scene because seeing Leti in the bathroom, they show through the mirror another creepy ghost, and then it pans to Tick really well. And whew, it gets hot and heavy. Again, boiler is cranking here. And you knew that that blood was the cherry being popped and not period. Because why the hell would they show it if it was just her having her period? You knew it was something more. And it's complicated for both of them this happening because they both know he's leaving. And she knows also, too, that she just lost her virginity to him. So it transitions well in the story to then her seeing this KKK type of shit in their yard with the cross burning. And then Leti gets this great moment where she has the bat now. She breaks the cars, breaks the horns, takes the bricks off. And it's really sad because after all this, they still know the police are coming and have to get down and be the ones arrested, even though they're the ones who have a burning cross in their yard. So we see this brutal scene with the cop and having Leti in the car, and he's basically torturing her through having the car go back and forth, getting information out of her, because he's like, how did you afford this house? Do you know what that house is? We learn that 8 black people died in it, and that it's called the Winthrop House. So we'll get more into that story and reveals of the Winthrop House. But we then transition to day 9. I thought it was odd that we just see Leti here is back home. I feel like there was a missing scene here. I would have liked a little kind of transitional scene of maybe she goes to the police station, then what? How did she just get out of that? So I'm just curious why that was skipped. It's another weird thing about these first 3 episodes. The only thing, it feels like sometimes the show is missing little scenes, and I know a lot of times it's strategic and it makes sense to skip stuff that's not necessary to show, but in this case I do think it was necessary. I'm just confused at how we went from that, her getting thrown around in a cop car, to the next day just being in her house again. So Leti finds all the photos now of these black people who died in the house, puts them together, and then we get the scientist come up here who is in this monster form, and she runs up the steps. I love they definitely left in a real trip that she had running up those steps. I love when directors make that decision because it's just more real. And she doesn't just trip there, she also then the next scene trips her words to her sister Ruby by saying, I still have money mama left. So didn't mean to say that in front of Ruby. This will set Ruby off. What's screwed up about it on Leti's part is even though Leti, yes, was duped and is under a spell and thinks that this money is from her mother's inheritance, she still, with that information, decided to not split it with Ruby, who has given her money like she says. And Leti in this same scene saying that the mother is someone who's selfish and only thinks for herself, Ruby calls her out and says, basically, you're the same thing. So I like how they're showing that theme too about Leti, and that she's not perfect and she may look down on her mother but has some of her mother in her. So shout out to the costume design in the next scene where we see Montrose and Hippolyta wearing the yellow and red matching the car they come out of from the first episode. It's a great color palette, and I love when shows have that kind of attention to detail. It's just visually pleasing to look at as well. And we see Montrose is coming around here a bit, where he was called out by Tick that he's not putting in his weight here with the family, and now he's like, oh, I'll go swing the bat with D. But here, see, this is when they go to the bookshop. He drops that Dracula book. It's a new copy of it. So she just says it was a coffee stain, but she calls him out here and says, you guys are hiding something. So I do think this is a really interesting story happening with Hippolyta, because it's giving her something interesting to kind of push back against them hiding, and that they just wouldn't get away with this, because it would have been really boring if they just showed her as a grieving wife. And plus, I'm really interested to see what she possibly did with that instrument we saw in the house. So then we get on day 10 here, Leti is with Tick, and she's connecting all the dots now. Figures out this scientist Epstein owned this house, was the one who tested on these black people, and that the cop she was in the car with was connected to Epstein. That's why he was so curious how she knew about the house, and they think that he was supplying Epstein with his test subjects. And when they realize this is basically the Winthrop house, Tick recognizes that name. He connects the dots now too, because Leti even says she feels like a ghost the past couple of days, like something is missing since they left Artem, and he just knows, okay, she's under a spell again. And that will lead to the final scene, which we'll get to. But here, I really thought this was really humorous to me, where they got the Oracle, and the Oracle just sacrifices a goat on the front porch. I thought that was really funny to see in original. And this theme the show's really pulled off well, is connecting the real life monsters and these white racist people to the supernatural monsters. And that shows here when they're summoning and doing this ritual in the basement. The monsters in the house, the real monsters, also are getting summoned, which are the 3 white guys that show up. They really give these 3 guys kills that really work, because it's justice totally being served, because 2 of them get killed by a radiator burning them, which throws to the boiler being screwed with, and then the other one gets his head freaking cut off from the elevator, which was the elevator that was never working. So justice is served really well, and I love that elevator kill, and how, again, if you know me, I'm a huge fan of gore, and it was just great. Overdo it, please. I always love it. Just they just had the blood coming out of his head, just really pulpy and awesome. And adding to that is then the Oracle, now getting possessed Exorcist style, gets thrown into the ceiling and then possesses Tick. Now this, for me, is where Jurnee Smollett shows her amazing acting chops. I'm blown away by her performance in this show, and this was her episode without a doubt, but this was her big moment, and that's when she's summoning all the ghosts now to take down the scientist that killed them all, and she's trying to keep Tick alive from possession. And when she delivered that line, "Get the F out of my house," holy crap, was that amazing. I mean, you take an already good scene like this, but when you have a performance like that, acting-wise, it takes it to a different level. It's memorable, it sucks you in, and what's really good about her acting is that she never seems like she's acting. She is having a fearless performance here, and what I mean by that is that she's not worried about how she looks, she's not worried about how she's saying the line, she's just being the character and is fully in it. You can just tell, and in this scene, it shows more than anything you've seen in the show, so really props to her. I'm absolutely blown away by her acting in this. So then I also like this shot here where we actually get the point of view of being in the elevator and it goes down, and then we see the 3 bodies in the basement of the 3 white guys. Now this will lead to our final scene that now connects a little more, which I wish happened a little more in this episode, to the overarching plot that started the show with the Sons of Adam. And we see Christina now again, and she's going into this sketchy realtor, Jerome Jackson, who was also connecting in Leda's investigation about this whole crew of this officer and Winthrop. And then we learn from Christina more about Winthrop, because Tick calls her out and says, "You gave Leti that money. I know you did, because I noticed the name Winthrop on your father's painting." So he takes a gun out on her. Unfortunately, it's not going to work against a witch. She freezes him up, which was awesome. She gets a kind of really cool scene to shine and now cement her towards the villain side of this than maybe if they were teasing where she'd be somewhere in the middle. So we learned Winthrop was in Sons of Adam, he stole some pages from the book and tried to do his own thing. And that Epstein, who was a scientist in the house, was a follower of him. Now that's important because Samuel, her father, we learned, had one spell, and that was invincibility, but he stopped the spell from being on him, that power he had to do this ritual in the last episode, backfired, he dies, but we learned these spells come from the Book of Names. So Titus, the founding member, hid his pages from the Books of Names in a booby-trapped vault, she says. But she says, those might not be obtainable, but what if we get access to Winthrop's pages he stole? And then the language of Adam can be decoded. So she's got this power-hungry trip, seems like she's going on now with these spells. And she says to Tick, call me when you want to learn about our family legacy. Which makes this so interesting because Tick is in this family tree. This is his birthright. And she's like this tempting force to him, connecting to the Adam and Eve story of the temptation in the garden. And she's got this line in the episode, you can't just go around killing a white woman. Boom, it ends. So this was a really tough one for me to actually rate. I think that I love the premiere, you know this. I thought episode 2 was still really solid, not as good. This one was my least favorite so far. And I think, like I said earlier, it's because it was more of a side quest and an actual full-on continuation to progressing the main overarching plot, which I think is already interesting. So you're like into it, but I feel like you're kind of also not, because your head wants to be somewhere else that you're already were kind of getting hooked to. And there's also just in general less meat and layers to this episode, where episode 1 and 2, there's so much to it thematically going on, but also stuff you have to pay attention to, really interesting as well. Where this one, again, it's like its own quest, and that's fine. It feels like almost anthology here, because you could watch this episode basically on its own if you hadn't seen the first 2 and still enjoy it in a sense, which that's credit to it, but there's a downside to that, because if that's not the actual format of the show in general, it kind of takes away from, again, that overarching plot we saw so heavily focused in episode 1 and 2, and you really see it, just to me, a little too thin here, where you should have had a little more of it, because you only get it really at the top and the bottom with Christina coming back. And it just wasn't as entertaining at the end of the day, this episode, but it had some really great moments, and again, just amazing acting all around. But my gut is telling me, still watching it, it wasn't the best out of the 3. So I'm going to give this one an 8.7. Still really great. I'm still excited to see where this is going to go. Let me know down below what you thought of this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment and try to respond to as many as I can. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss one of my reviews. I also do movie reviews. I'm also going to be reviewing The Boys Season 2, so you don't want to miss any of that. And I also do celebrity interviews. I can use all the subscribers I can get. It really helps me in so many ways. You have no idea. So please, if you can hit that button, I'll be forever grateful. And please make sure to follow me at Steve Varley Show on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.